The Volari delegation stood motionless in the United Nations Assembly Hall, their silver-blue skin reflecting the bright lights as cameras captured humanity's first official alien encounter. Dr. Kelson stepped forward, his four-fingered hands performing the ceremonial greeting gesture that had smoothly initiated peaceful relations with 37 previous species. "We bring knowledge and prosperity from the Galactic Collective," he announced through their universal translator. The device had been calibrated based on thousands of intercepted broadcasts, but something in the translation made several human delegates exchange glances. Secretary General Cato raised an eyebrow. "Prosperity on whose terms, Dr. Kelson?" The question wasn't in the first contact protocol. None of the Volari's extensive simulations had predicted such a direct challenge so early in proceedings. Dr. Kelson's auxiliary brain stems pulsed with mild distress. "The collective exists to elevate all sentient life," he responded smoothly. "Our terms are simply the natural laws of evolutionary progress." Sophia Chen, the Chinese-American diplomat who had greeted them first, leaned forward. "Interesting. And who determines what constitutes progress?" The Volari exchanged subtle neural signals, invisible to human eyes. These creatures were following none of the predicted conversation paths. Kelson felt something unfamiliar: doubt. "Perhaps we should proceed with cultural exchange before philosophical debates," he suggested, activating the holographic display that had reliably awed primitive species for millennia. The chamber filled with stunning images of collective achievements: artificial worlds, star-encircling structures, biological immortality. Expressions of wonder appeared on human faces, but not the expected reverence or submission. "Impressive engineering," commented the Russian representative, "though your energy utilization seems inefficient by our theoretical models." Dr. Kelson's tertiary brain stem nearly shut down from shock. These humans, barely capable of reaching their own moon, were critiquing collective engineering that had been perfected before their ancestors had discovered fire. "Your species has achieved space travel remarkably quickly," offered Saltu, the junior anthropologist, attempting to steer the conversation back to protocol. "Most species require at least 20,000 more years of development before achieving your current technological state." General Helena Martinez, representing Earth's military coalition, fixed her gaze on Saltu. "And how many of those species developed under observation?" The question hung in the air, devastating in its implication. The Volari delegation trembled almost imperceptibly as their neural networks processed the unthinkable. These humans suspected monitoring. Worse, they were correct. Dr. Kelson recovered first. "We assure you, Earth's development has been entirely natural." "That wasn't an answer to my question, Doctor," Martins replied with a thin smile. Later that evening, as Earth's major powers hosted a welcoming reception for the Volari, Dr. Kelson observed humans from a quiet corner. They moved through complex social rituals with remarkable ease, shifting between humor, seriousness, deception, and honesty in patterns his predictive algorithms couldn't map. A small human child approached, no more than 7 years old, staring up at him with unnerving directness. "Why are you afraid of us?" she asked simply. "We are not afraid," Kelson responded automatically. "The collective fears nothing." The child tilted her head. "Your eyes dilated when my mom asked about the other worlds. That means you're hiding something." She shrugged. "My dad says everybody lies sometimes. Even aliens, I guess." As she skipped away, Dr. Kelson sent an urgent encrypted message to the High Council. Immediate reassessment required. Humans possess unprecedented observational intelligence and psychological insight. First contact protocols failing. Request new directives. The response came almost instantly. Proceed as planned. Primitive species always display initial resistance. Evolutionary patterns are immutable. Dr. Kelson watched the humans laughing, arguing, and forming alliances across the reception hall. For the first time in his 300-year career, he wondered if the collective might be catastrophically wrong. The Collected's temporary embassy occupied an architectural marvel in Geneva, its crystalline structure adapting to Earth's sunlight in ways that left human engineers puzzled and impressed. Inside the eastern wing, Alex Rivera hunched over the dismantled components of a Volari quantum calculation engine, his fingers moving with surprising confidence across technology that should have been incomprehensible to him. The thermal management system routes energy in a perfect Fibonacci sequence. He muttered to himself, then glanced up at the hovering Tolmeri observer. But you're losing efficiency by forcing mathematical perfection instead of adapting to the actual heat distribution patterns. The Tolmeri's translucent body pulsed with blue bioluminescence, an indicator of intense cognitive processing. The system was designed by our greatest mathematical minds, it replied, tentacles gently undulating. The Fibonacci sequence represents optimal distribution in all tested models. Alex shrugged, reaching for a stylus and digital pad. In theory, sure. But look at the actual energy flow when processing complex calculations. He sketched a diagram showing heat buildup at junction points. The sequence is mathematically perfect, but reality is messier than math. The Tolmeri observer fell silent, its neural clusters visibly firing as it processed this observation. After 87 seconds of calculation, and eternity for its species, it responded with what humans had begun calling the alien pause, that moment when collective species confronted human thinking that defied their expectations. How did you identify this pattern without quantum sensitivity or mathematical modeling? The Tolmeri finally asked. Alex smiled. I didn't calculate it. I felt it. He tapped the machine. When this section runs hot calculations, it vibrates at a different frequency. Listen. In the observation room behind mirrored glass, Dr. Kelsen watched the exchange with growing fascination. Beside him, the Tolmeri High Scholar's tentacles had gone completely still, a sign of extreme concentration. This marks the 47th instance of human intuitive problem-solving that bypasses established logical frameworks, Kelsen noted. Their brains appear to process information through channels we cannot measure or predict. The High Scholar's voice emerged from its speech sac in measured tones. The human correctly identified a flaw that has existed in our technology for 12 generations. Without mathematical tools, without quantum sensitivity, without training, a ripple of deep purple moved across its central body. This should not be possible. Dr. Kelsen's data pad chimed with new information from the testing facility across the complex. The results from the standardized intelligence assessments are equally perplexing. Humans score within expected parameters on structured logical problems, but when presented with scenarios requiring intuitive leaps. He paused, rechecking the data. They consistently outperform predictions by factors of 3 to 17. The High Scholar's body darkened to indigo, the deepest indication of concern its species could display. Perhaps most troubling is their pattern recognition in chaotic systems. The 12-year-old subject identified the underlying structure in the weather pattern simulation after observing it for only 4 minutes. Our own meteorological specialists require quantum computing assistance to achieve similar results. On the testing floor below them, a young girl named Priya Sharma was explaining to increasingly agitated Volari scientists how she had solved their atmospheric prediction problem. It's like watching clouds, she explained with a shrug. You can feel which way they want to move if you pay attention to the shapes they make. It's not that complicated. Dr. Kelsen made a notation in his personal research log. Humans appear to possess parallel cognitive processing that operates outside conscious awareness. They call this intuition and consider it ordinary. The implications are disturbing. Maya Chen's laboratory at Telleris Prime hummed with activity despite the late hour by local standards. The massive gas giant loomed outside the reinforced windows, its swirling storms casting shifting colors across her workstation. While the other human exchange students slept, Maya worked, her hands dancing across holographic interfaces with unexpected familiarity. Your adaptation to our interface technology exceeds all projected learning curves, noted senior instructor Valzik, one of the few Volari who had remained supportive of the Human Education Initiative. Most species require months to achieve proficiency with quantum-responsive controls. Maya didn't look up from her work. "It's just like playing piano," she replied, fingers continuing their intricate movements. "You feel the resistance patterns and adjust accordingly." On the testing platform, her modified faster-than-light drive component pulsed with energy. The collective's standard FTL engines operated on principles humans had theorized but never proven, utilizing quantum folding to create microscopic wormholes that collapsed immediately after passage. Maya's adaptation incorporated principles from Earth's still theoretical unified field equations, creating a hybrid approach that shocked collective engineers. The efficiency increase defies explanation, Valzik admitted, studying the readings. "You've introduced elements that our designers would never have considered." "That's because your designers follow predetermined pathways," Maya responded, finally looking up. "You build brilliantly on existing knowledge, but rarely challenge foundational assumptions." Valzik's secondary brainstem pulsed with mild offense before curiosity took over. "Explain." "Your entire educational system teaches species to accept established principles and build upon them incrementally. You perfect what's known rather than questioning why it's known." She gestured toward her modified drive. "I asked why faster-than-light travel requires quantum folding at all. That simple question led to this hybrid approach." Across the moon base in the diplomatic wing, the High Scholar was reviewing disturbing reports from collective representatives assigned to Earth universities. The elegant Talmari floated above its liquid suspension pool, tentacles occasionally rippling with distress as it absorbed the information. "Their educational methodology systematically encourages challenging established knowledge," it told the gathered council representatives. "Students receive higher assessments for questioning their instructors' assertions and proposing alternative frameworks." The Korlax delegate, a crystalline being who served as keeper of collective knowledge, emitted a frequency that translated as deep concern. Such approaches breed dangerous instability. No wonder their history shows such chaotic advancement patterns. Yet they advance nonetheless, noted Dr. Kelsen, who had been summoned to provide context, often through conceptual leaps that bypass multiple developmental stages. The High Scholar's color darkened. "What troubles me most is their response to having theories disproven. Rather than experiencing shame, they appear to celebrate the discovery of incorrect assumptions." Professor Mazik reports being publicly corrected by a human undergraduate student who identified a flaw in his quantum decay calculations. "And what consequences did this student face?" asked the Korlax delegate. The human instructor awarded the student additional merit points for what they termed excellent critical thinking, replied the High Scholar, its tentacles nearly motionless in what collective species recognized as shock. The professor himself later thanked the student for the correction. In the silence that followed, Dr. Kelsen found himself reconsidering everything he'd been taught about knowledge acquisition and species development. The collective had always operated on the principle that advancement followed predictable, orderly patterns. Humans seemed to thrive on disrupting such patterns. "Perhaps," he ventured carefully, "we should consider that there may be multiple valid paths to advance knowledge. The human approach produces inefficiencies and many failed experiments, but it also generates innovations we would never conceive." The Korlax delegate's crystalline surface fractured slightly, the equivalent of a dismissive scoff. "Or perhaps we are witnessing precisely why most species require guidance. Left unchecked, such chaotic development eventually self-destructs." Dr. Kelsen watched the council members signal agreement and felt a troubling question form in his mind. What if they were wrong? The Grand Archive was a marvel of engineering that spanned the interior of a hollowed-out moon orbiting a neutron star. Its crystal lattice computer core processed data at speeds that made Earth's most advanced supercomputers seem like abacuses by comparison. For 12,000 years, it had predicted the developmental trajectories of civilizations with perfect accuracy. Until humans. Chief Historian Zolat drifted through the archive's central chamber, his jellyfish-like body pulsing with agitation. The Talmari had dedicated his 300-year lifespan to maintaining the purity of the archive's predictive models. Now warnings flashed across the quantum displays surrounding him. "Explain these anomalies," he demanded of his staff. "Why does the model collapse beyond the 30-year horizon?" The junior analysts exchanged neural signals before one responded. "We believe the issue lies in human decision-making processes. They deliberately introduce randomness where optimization would be logical." Zolat's tentacles curled in frustration. Randomness does not exist in a deterministic universe. All apparent chaos eventually reveals underlying patterns. "Not with humans," the analyst insisted, projecting data into the shared neural space. "Observe the gravity manipulation incident. Our projections gave them 47 years to develop the technology. They accelerated development specifically to contradict our prediction." "But that defies rational behavior," Zolat protested. "No species would expend additional resources merely to prove a prediction wrong." "Humans would," came a voice from the entrance chamber. Dr. Keldson floated in, accompanied by a human observer, Dr. Emily Nakamura from the Earth Science Council, and have, repeatedly throughout their history. Zolat's body darkened with displeasure at the human's presence in the sacred archive. This facility contains sensitive data from thousands of worlds. Human access was not authorized by the Council. "Actually," Emily smiled, "it was included in subsection 47.3 of the Knowledge Exchange Protocols your representatives signed last month. I believe the collective prides itself on honoring agreements to the letter." The Talmari's tentacles went rigid, the equivalent of a grimace. "What do you know of our prediction failures?" "That they're not failures at all," Emily replied, approaching one of the displays. "Your models assume all intelligent species optimize for efficiency and survival. Humans sometimes optimize for curiosity, challenge, or even humor." Zolat's neural clusters pulsed with confusion. "Humor is not a valid optimization parameter for species development. Tell that to the team that developed our gravity manipulation prototype," Emily chuckled. "They worked around the clock partly because Dr. Katri wanted to see the look on your faces when they proved your timeline wrong." The archive's central crystal pulsed with warning light as it processed this information. On the main display, human developmental trajectories split into thousands of possible branches where they should have converged into a predictable pattern. "Your species' behavior introduces what we term a chaos variable," Zolat said finally. "It renders long-term prediction impossible." "We call it free will," Emily countered. "And it's the reason human history is filled with unexpected breakthroughs, irrational heroism, and seemingly random acts of both creation and destruction." Later that evening, Zolat submitted his findings to the High Council with an unprecedented recommendation. Human developmental patterns cannot be guided using standard protocols. Their deliberate introduction of randomness makes their future actions fundamentally unpredictable beyond limited timeframes. I hereby classify humanity as exhibiting evolutionary defiance, only the third species in collective history to receive this designation. What Zolat did not include in his official report was what had happened after the human woman left. He had run a restricted query about the previous species classified as showing evolutionary defiance. The results had been sealed under the highest security protocols, accessible only to the Inner Council. But Talmari had perfect memory, and Zolat recalled a passing reference in historical texts from his youth. Those species had disappeared from collective records entirely, with only cryptic references to necessary containment remaining. For the first time in his long career, Zolat found himself wondering if the Grand Archive's purpose was truly to guide species development, or to identify potential threats to collective dominance. The Thrav analysis chamber resembled nothing so much as a massive geometric puzzle. Crystalline structures arranged in perfect hexagonal patterns covered every surface, each facet displaying data flowing in streams too rapid for human eyes to comprehend. The Thrav themselves, Vaguely humanoid beings with silicon-based biology moved through the space with mathematical precision, their movements as measured as their thoughts. Lead analyst Nexer stood perfectly still at the center of the chamber, absorbing the final results of their human military assessment. Behind him, Dr. Kelson waited with uncharacteristic tension alongside General Helena Martinez, Earth's military liaison to the collective. "Your assessment is complete," Kelson inquired after the Thrav had remained motionless for nearly 5 minutes. Nexer turned with mechanical smoothness. The analysis produced concerning results. Human military development follows no logical optimization pattern yet achieves remarkable effectiveness through seemingly irrational strategies. General Martinez smiled thinly. "Care to elaborate?" The Thrav's crystalline features remained expressionless, but his voice carried subtle harmonics of distress. "Your historical records indicate 17 documented instances where technologically inferior human forces defeated superior opponents through what we term acceptable sacrifice ratios. You willingly sustain casualties at rates that would trigger automatic surrender protocols in any collective species." Martinez crossed her arms. "We call it courage." "We call it illogical," countered Nexer. "More disturbing is your species' dedication to simulating conflict scenarios. Our cultural analysis reveals that humans have invested more collective mental energy in warfare simulations than in any other single discipline." "Chess is just a game," Martinez shrugged. "A game that teaches strategic thinking, sacrifice calculation, and positional advantage." Nexer responded. "Your entertainment consistently reinforces military concepts. Even your children engage in rudimentary combat simulations." Dr. Kelson watched the exchange with growing concern. The Thrav rarely engaged directly with lesser species, preferring to deliver their analyses through intermediaries. This direct interaction indicated significant alarm. "What troubles us most," Nexer continued, "is your species' retention of nuclear weapons technology, despite full awareness of its destructive potential. All other species abandon such technologies once their consequences are understood. Humans not only maintained these arsenals, but developed intricate game theories around their potential use." "Mutual assured destruction," Martinez nodded. "It worked. We haven't had a global war in over 80 years. The Thrav's silicon skin fractured slightly, the equivalent of raising an eyebrow. You prevented war by perfecting the logic of annihilation. This is not a developmental path the collective predicted as viable." Later, in the collective's secure strategy chamber, Nexer delivered his final assessment to the High Council. Dr. Kelson observed from a permitted position near the entrance. "Human military potential poses a unique concern," the Thrav concluded. "Their combination of technological adaptability, willingness to accept casualties, and fundamentally unpredictable strategy formulation creates an unprecedented scenario. Even with their current technological limitations, they employ approaches no collective species would conceive." The Korlax representative's crystalline body shimmered with agitation. "Provide your projection for military parity achievement." "With current knowledge exchange protocols in place," Nexer replied, "humans could achieve effective military parity with collective forces within 98 years. This advancement rate exceeds any previously documented species by a factor of 3. A ripple of neural communication passed through the council members, too rapid for translation, but carrying unmistakable emotional overtones of alarm. "Recommend immediate review of knowledge exchange protocols," the Korlax stated. "Sensitive technologies must be reclassified under containment guidelines." "I recommend more," Nexer added, his perfect logical processes leading to a conclusion that surprised even him. Humanity represents the first species encountered that could theoretically challenge collective dominance through military means. The Council must consider whether standard evolutionary guidance will be sufficient. Dr. Kelson felt a chill pass through his primary nervous system. The term evolutionary guidance had specific meaning in collective protocols, one that had been applied only twice before in their long history. Neither of those species existed any longer in recognizable form. As he left the chamber, Kelzin made a decision that would change the course of his life. Tonight, he would contact his human colleagues with information they desperately needed to know. The Princeton University Library had become Tavik's sanctuary over the past months. The junior Volari researcher found comfort in the ancient paper books, so different from the neural interfaces of collective archives. Tonight, his four-fingered hands trembled slightly as he placed a data crystal on the table where Dr. Sarah Mosley waited. "This violates every oath I took as a collective scientist," he whispered, glancing nervously at the exit. "But you deserve to know." Sarah slid the crystal into her specialized reader. "You're taking an enormous risk, Tavik." "Why?" The Volari's skin rippled with emotion. "Because I discovered something troubling in human literature. Your stories predicted this." Sarah frowned. "Predicted what?" "How advanced species might treat emerging civilizations. Your authors imagined scenarios where technologically superior beings might contain, control, or even eliminate potential competitors." His voice dropped lower. "What disturbs me is how closely these fictional scenarios match classified collective protocols." The data crystal projected images of documents with the highest security classifications. Sarah's eyes widened as she scanned translation overlays. "Species management protocols," she read aloud. "Evolutionary guidance measures, cognitive limitation procedures, cultural redirection initiatives." She looked up sharply. "This reads like a manual for controlling developing civilizations." "It is precisely that," Tavik confirmed. "The collective has applied these measures to two previous species that exhibited what they termed evolutionary defiance. The same classification recently applied to humans." "What happened to those species?" Tavik's skin darkened to deep blue, the Volari equivalent of a grimace. "They were adjusted. Their neural pathways were subtly modified over generations to enhance cooperation and diminish competitive instincts. They still exist, but as shadows of what they might have become." 3 days later, the information had spread across Earth's governments despite the collective's frantic attempts at containment. Emergency sessions at the United Nations debated humanity's response, while collective representatives dismissed the documents as creative misinterpretations of routine developmental guidelines. In the collective's Emergency Command Center, the High Council faced an unprecedented crisis. The Korlax representative's crystalline form pulsed with agitation as reports flowed in. "Containment has failed," it announced to the gathered council. "Human governments are implementing defensive measures and demanding access to restricted technical data as a show of good faith." "How did they obtain classified protocols?" demanded the Talmeri representative. "Our security systems are impenetrable." "Apparently not to a motivated Volari with human sympathies," replied the Korlax bitterly. "The researcher Tavik has disappeared, presumably with human assistance." The chamber doors opened unexpectedly, admitting Dr. Kelzin. The anthropologist's normally composed demeanor had vanished, replaced by an intensity that startled the council members. "I can no longer remain silent," he announced without preamble. "I have verified the leaked protocols and can confirm their authenticity." A ripple of shock passed through the assembled council members. "You overstep your authority," warned the Korlax. "These matters are beyond your clearance level." "I accessed the sealed records," Kelzin continued, undeterred. "I know what happened to the Neverans and the Lethiri, how their neural pathways were systematically altered over generations until they became docile client species incapable of true innovation. Those measures were necessary for galactic stability," the Talmeri representative countered. "The alternative was potential conflict that could have destroyed millions of worlds." "Was it?" Kelzin challenged. "Or was it simply that they developed along paths the collective couldn't predict or control?" He straightened to his full height. "I have transmitted my findings to my human colleagues. If any action is taken against Earth, the complete historical record will be broadcast to every species in collective space." The council chamber erupted in chaos as Kelzin was forcibly removed. In the confusion, No one noticed the human cultural attaché who had been permitted to observe the session slip quietly away, carrying information that would change humanity's approach to the coming confrontation. Outside the collective embassy on Earth, crowds gathered as news of the leaked protocols spread. Signs bearing quotes from science fiction authors appeared. "We were warned about this centuries ago," one read, displaying words from H.G. Wells. Another simply stated, "We will not be managed." Maya Chen's office at the Global Strategic Response Center hummed with activity. Holographic displays showed collective ship movements, while teams of scientists and military strategists worked in focused silence. Dr. Kelsen sat opposite her, his silver-blue skin pallid from weeks of stress since his public break with the collective. "You've confirmed your hypothesis?" he asked quietly. Maya nodded, sliding a tablet toward him. "The evolutionary psychology analysis is conclusive. Collective species evolved almost exclusively through cooperation within their own kinds. Even predatory species like the Thrav developed intelligence through pack coordination rather than competition. While humans, we evolved through a unique balance of cooperation and competition," Maya finished. "Our tribal structures required intense cooperation within groups but fierce competition between them. This created selection pressure for what game theorists call strategic deception, the ability to conceal true intentions or bluff." Kelsen studied the data, his auxiliary brain stems processing implications, and collective species never developed this capacity because it wasn't necessary for their survival. "Exactly. Your species can conceive of deception intellectually, but lack the neural architecture to implement it effectively." She smiled slightly. "You're terrible liars, Dr. Kelsen." The Volari made a sound that approximated a human chuckle. "This explains much about our diplomatic failures. The collective approaches negotiations assuming rational actors will converge on optimal solutions, while we approach negotiations assuming everyone has hidden agendas," Maya replied. "This creates a fundamental disconnection." The office door slid open as Admiral Helena Vasquez entered with Secretary General Cato. Both wore the grim expressions of leaders preparing for conflict. "The Collective Council has rejected our proposal for unrestricted information sharing," Cato announced. "They've implemented orbital containment protocols, citing security concerns." Translation: "They're blockading Earth," Vasquez added flatly. "Our lunar bases report collective ships establishing position around all major orbital lanes." Maya and Kelsen exchanged glances. "Then we proceed with Operation Wildcard," Maya said. "Admiral, is the quantum device ready?" "Tested and operational," Vasquez confirmed. "Though I still don't fully understand how it works." "That's entirely the point," Maya replied with a tight smile. "Neither will they." 3 days later, in the neutral meeting facility established on the International Space Station, human representatives faced the collective's diplomatic delegation across a simple black table. The station had been modified to accommodate various alien physiologies, with special chambers for the liquid-immersed Tallmarty and reinforced flooring for the dense crystalline Korlax. "The collective's position remains unchanged," stated the Korlax representative. "Human technological development must proceed under appropriate guidance to ensure galactic stability." Admiral Vasquez placed a small black cube on the table. Its surface seemed to shift and ripple like oil on water, occasionally emitting soft pulses of light in patterns that followed no discernible sequence. "This device contains a quantum-entangled decision matrix linked to systems throughout Earth's solar system," she explained calmly. "Its programming is deliberately random. Even we don't know what choices it will make if activated." The collective representatives visibly recoiled. The Tallmary's tentacles contracted while the Volari's skin blanched to near white. "You're bluffing," the Korlax finally stated. "No rational species would create a random response protocol for planetary defense." "That's the beauty of it," Vasquez smiled. "We're not entirely rational by your standards. The matrix incorporates true quantum randomness. There's no algorithm to predict, no pattern to analyze. Even we can't calculate what it might do. Dr. Kelson leaned forward, addressing his former colleagues. They're not bluffing. Human game theory has developed the concept of credible threats through randomization for centuries. It's why their nuclear deterrent strategies worked despite seeming irrational. The collective representatives conferred through neural links, their agitation evident in their physical responses. Humans had introduced true randomness into a negotiation with beings whose entire evolutionary and cultural development was based on predictability and optimization. Perhaps, the Korlax finally offered, temporary accommodation can be reached while we reconsider certain protocols. Maya Chen exchanged a glance with Admiral Vasquez. The game theory gambit was working. When facing true randomness, even the galaxy's most intelligent beings couldn't calculate odds. The Grand Symposium Hall on Collective Prime sparkled with crystalline architecture designed to optimize acoustic and visual perfection for all member species. 1 year after the crisis that nearly led to conflict, representatives from 1,000 worlds gathered to commemorate the historic alliance between humanity and the collective. Dr. Kelson, now bearing the newly created title of Director of Evolutionary Intelligence, stood beside Maya Chen as they watched the proceedings from a private observation deck. Below them, human diplomats mingled with beings of countless physiologies, communicating through advanced translation devices that had improved dramatically with human input. Your species has transformed the collective in just 1 year, Kelson observed. The reforms would have been unthinkable before. Maya smiled. Sometimes fresh perspectives are all that's needed to break through established patterns. It goes deeper than perspective, Kelson replied. The decision to recognize humanity as equals despite your developmental immaturity has created ripple effects throughout collective society. The concept of diverse intellectual approaches being valuable rather than disruptive. He paused, searching for the right words. It challenges 50,000 years of established doctrine. On the main floor, the High Scholar of the Talmuri floated in its suspension chamber, tentacles gently undulating as it engaged with human philosophers about consciousness and perception. Nearby, Dhrav analysts exchanged mathematical concepts with human game theorists, their crystalline features showing rare expressions of emotion that resembled fascination. Not everyone is pleased with the changes, Maya noted, nodding toward a group of elder collective representatives who kept their distance from the human contingent. The old guard, Kelson acknowledged. They still believe the traditional approach to guiding species development is correct. They see the reforms as dangerous concessions. The background music shifted as a small group entered through the main doors, drawing attention throughout the hall. A human family. Dr. Emily Nakamura, her partner Dr. James Wilson, and their 7-year-old daughter Lily moved through the crowd accompanied by Volari guides. The quantum physics prodigy, Maya asked. Kelson nodded. The High Council requested her presence specifically. Her intuitive understanding of multidimensional mathematics has caused quite a stir. They moved closer as the girl approached a display that had been puzzling Volari mathematicians for centuries. The impossible lattice, as it was known, was a theoretical construct representing multidimensional spacetime folding, the cornerstone of advanced physics that enabled faster-than-light travel, but with fundamental limitations that no collective species had been able to resolve. Lily studied the holographic display with the casual interest of a child looking at an interesting toy. After a moment, she reached out and began manipulating the glowing geometric shapes, rearranging them in ways that made several Volari mathematicians exchange alarmed neural signals. That configuration is non-optimal. One began to explain, but fell silent as the lattice suddenly stabilized in a pattern never before achieved. The mathematical formulas surrounding the display recalculated, showing a perfect resolution to equations that had remained unsolved for millennia. The angles were wrong, Lily explained with a child's simplicity. If you look at it sideways, the pattern makes more sense. In the stunned silence that followed, Dr. Kelson observed the expressions on the collective's Supreme Council members. Behind their diplomatic smiles lay something he had never expected to see in the galaxy's most advanced beings: genuine fear. Later that evening, after the reception concluded, the inner council of the collective met in their secure chamber. Despite the celebration of unity and cooperation, their private discussion took a darker turn. The child solved in moments what our greatest minds could not resolve in centuries, the tall Mary High Scholar stated, its color shifting to deep indigo. The shade of profound concern. One exceptional individual does not define a species, countered the Korlax representative. Doesn't it? Asked the Volari elder. Our models suggest she is not an outlier, but a harbinger. Human neural plasticity combined with their intuitive processing creates potential we cannot predict. The unspoken question hung in the chamber: what would these unpredictable, chaotic, brilliant creatures become in 1,000 years? And would there still be a place for the collective in such a future?